The sound of splintering wood and screeching metal tore through the quiet serenity of the forest, a violent symphony that was grotesquely out of place. Maya Bennett, her heart hammering against her ribs, dropped the rare orchid she'd been photographing and sprinted towards the sound. She didn't know who was in that car, a mangled wreck of luxury steel now wrapped around an ancient oak. She didn't know the man slumped unconscious over the steering wheel was worth more than most small countries. She certainly didn't know that this single act of kindness, of pulling him from the brink of death, would plunge her into a world of lies, danger, and a mystery that would threaten to consume her entirely. All she knew was that a life was hanging in the balance, and she was the only one there to save it. But when he vanished from her secluded cabin days later, leaving behind only a blood-stained pillow and 1,000 unanswered questions, she began to understand this was no ordinary man and no simple accident. What would you do if the person you saved denied your very existence to the entire world? Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The scent of pine and damp earth, usually a source of comfort for Maya, was now laced with the acrid smell of gasoline and burnt rubber. It clung to the air, a toxic perfume marking the spot where chaos had violently intruded upon her sanctuary. For the past 5 years, these woods had been her refuge, a place to heal from a life that had become too loud, too demanding, too full of ghosts. Her small, rustic cabin, nestled deep within the sprawling national forest, was more than just a home. It was a fortress of solitude, a place where the only demands were those of nature itself. She was a wildlife photographer, a seeker of quiet moments and hidden beauty, a life she had chosen after the clamor of the city and a failed, high-pressure career in marketing had left her feeling hollowed out. Now, that hard-won peace was shattered. The man she had pulled from the mangled wreckage of a car that looked like it belonged on a movie set, not a forgotten logging trail, lay still in her spare room. He was a canvas of bruises and cuts, a stark contrast to the soft, worn quilt she had draped over him. His face, even in its battered state, held a chiseled perfection that seemed unnatural, like a sculpture that had been tragically dropped. His clothes, or what was left of them, were tailored and expensive, the fabric whispering of a world Maya had long since abandoned. For 3 days, she was his keeper. She cleaned his wounds with a gentle hand, her photographer's eye for detail now focused on the rise and fall of his chest, the faint flutter of his eyelids. She brewed herbal remedies her grandmother had taught her, their earthy aromas mingling with the scent of antiseptic. She sat by his bedside, the silence of the room punctuated only by the crackle of the fire and the man's shallow breaths. He drifted in and out of consciousness, his words a jumbled mess of half-formed sentences and fevered murmurs. He spoke of algorithms and stock prices, of betrayal, and a woman named Seraphina. The name was uttered with a mixture of venom and longing that piqued Maya's curiosity. She never once thought to call the authorities. The nearest ranger station was a 2-hour drive away, and cell service was a fickle dream in this part of the woods. Besides, a strange, protective instinct had taken root in her heart. He was vulnerable, and the world he came from, the world of luxury cars and whispered betrayals, felt like a threat. So she watched over him, this handsome stranger who had literally crashed into her life, and waited. She learned the rhythm of his breathing, the way his brow would furrow in his sleep, the soft groan that escaped his lips just before he stirred. She found herself talking to him, her voice a low murmur filling the quiet space, telling him about the family of deer that frequented her garden, the hawk that nested in the tallest pine, the simple, beautiful things that made her up her world. On the 4th morning, the cabin felt different. The air was still, too still. The usual rhythm of his breathing was absent. A knot of dread tightened in Maya's stomach as she pushed open the door to the spare room. The bed was empty. The quilt was neatly folded, a stark, pristine square against the rustic wood of the bed frame. The only evidence that he had ever been there was a small, dark stain on the pillowcase, a speck of dried blood, and the faint, lingering scent of the expensive cologne he wore. He was gone. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through her. She searched the cabin, her calls echoing in the empty rooms. She scoured the woods around her home, her boots crunching on the fallen leaves as she followed a faint trail of footprints that led to the old logging road, and then nothing. They simply vanished, as if he had been spirited away. Had he walked away? In his condition, it seemed impossible. Had someone found him? But who? And why leave without a word? The question swirled in her mind, a frantic, chaotic dance of confusion and a growing sense of unease. He had been weak, disoriented. How could he have just disappeared? A week passed, a week of strained silence and unanswered questions. The forest, once her sanctuary, now felt menacing, its shadows hiding secrets. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves, sent a jolt of alarm through her. She replayed their brief time together, searching for clues, for anything that might explain his sudden departure. The fragments of his fevered ramblings, the name Seraphina, the talk of betrayal, it was all a meaningless jumble. She began to doubt herself. Had she imagined it all? Was she so lonely that she had conjured a handsome, mysterious stranger to fill the void? But the blood stain on the pillow was real. The mangled car, which had mysteriously vanished from the crash site a day after his disappearance, was real. It was on a trip to the small town at the edge of the forest for supplies that her world tilted on its axis. The face of her mysterious patient stared back at her from the screen of a television in the corner of the general store. The news anchor's voice was grave, announcing the miraculous return of Liam Ashford, the reclusive tech billionaire who had been missing for over a week after a suspected kidnapping attempt. The man on the screen was cleaner, more polished, his handsome features now composed and confident. He was standing in front of a sleek, modern building, a phalanx of reporters shouting questions at him. Maya's heart pounded in her chest. Liam Ashford. The name reverberated through her, a missing piece of the puzzle clicking into place. She listened, her blood turning to ice, as a reporter asked him about the days he was missing, about the rumors of a car crash. Liam's smile was smooth, practiced, a mask of cool composure. There was no car crash, he said, his voice calm and steady, a voice she had heard only in fevered whispers, but recognized instantly. I was taking some personal time, away from the pressures of my work. The rumors of my disappearance were greatly exaggerated. Denial. A flat, public, and absolute denial. He stood there, in front of the world, and erased her. He erased the crash, the blood, the quiet intimacy of her cabin. He erased her care, her worry, her existence. A wave of nausea washed over her. Why? Why would he lie? Fear, a cold and primal fear, began to creep in. This wasn't just a simple case of a man wanting to maintain his privacy. This was something bigger, something more dangerous. The fragmented whispers of betrayal and the venomous utterance of the name Seraphina suddenly seemed less like the ramblings of a concussed mind and more like pieces of a puzzle she was never meant to see. The drive back to her cabin was a blur of confusion and a simmering, righteous anger. The quiet solitude of her home now felt like a cage, a place where she was hidden away, her reality denied by the man she had saved. She had to know why. The quiet, peaceful life she had so carefully constructed had been irrevocably breached. She was no longer just a wildlife photographer. She was the woman who had saved the billionaire, and she wanted answers. The forest had brought him to her, a broken man in a broken car. Now, fate, it seemed, would have to bring them back together. And when it did, she would be ready. The hunter of quiet moments had a new subject in her sights, and this time, she wouldn't be using a camera. The days that followed Liam's televised reappearance were a torment for Maya. The woods, her once steadfast companion, now seemed to mock her with their silence. Every rustle of leaves was a whisper of the secret she carried, a secret that had been publicly declared a fiction. She found herself unable to focus on her photography, the vibrant hues of a wildflower or the majestic flight of a hawk failing to capture her attention. Her mind was a relentless loop of Liam's face on the television screen, his cool, dismissive words echoing in her ears. He hadn't just denied the crash, he had invalidated her experience, her reality. It was a subtle form of violence, a psychological erasure that left her feeling untethered and strangely powerless. Her frustration grew into a steely resolve. She wasn't a damsel in distress, nor was she a person who would allow herself to be so easily dismissed. The marketing world she'd fled had taught her one valuable skill: research. She began to dig, using the satellite internet that was her one, often unreliable, link to the outside world. She devoured every article, every business profile, every paparazzi photo of Liam Ashford she could find. He was a titan of the tech industry, the enigmatic founder of Ashford Innovations, a company at the forefront of artificial intelligence and renewable energy. He was described as brilliant, driven, and fiercely private. His public appearances were rare, his personal life a closely guarded fortress. The articles spoke of his meteoric rise, his ruthless business acumen, and the trail of crushed competitors he had left in his wake. They also hinted at a more complex figure, a philanthropist who had donated billions to environmental causes, a man who had lost his parents in a tragic accident as a young man, a detail that struck a chord of Cain, sympathy in Maya despite her anger. Then she found it, a series of articles about a contentious corporate takeover. Liam's company was in the final stages of acquiring a smaller but highly innovative rival, a move that would solidify his dominance in the market. The deal was fraught with tension, with rumors of industrial espionage and a bitter rivalry between Liam and the CEO of the other company. And then, a name jumped out at her, a name that sent a jolt of recognition through her: Seraphina. Seraphina Dubois was the chief technology officer of the company Liam was acquiring. She was described as brilliant, ambitious, and utterly ruthless. The articles painted her as Liam's equal, his shadow in the corporate world, a woman who was both his adversary and, according to some gossip columns, a former lover. The pieces began to fall into place, forming a picture that was far more sinister than a simple case of amnesia or a desire for privacy. The car crash, the talk of betrayal, the name Seraphina, it all pointed to something more than a simple accident. Had the crash been an attempt on his life? Was Seraphina involved? And if so, why deny it? Why create this elaborate charade of a voluntary retreat? The questions multiplied, each one more unsettling than the last. Maya knew she couldn't let it go. This was no longer just about her bruised pride or the need for validation. It was about the truth, a truth that seemed to be buried under layers of corporate intrigue and high-stakes deception. She felt a strange sense of responsibility, a duty to the broken man she had cared for, the man who had whispered his fears to her in the dead of night. She made a decision that went against every instinct that had led her to seek a life of solitude. She had to go to him. She had to confront him. The thought was terrifying. She was a woman who found solace in the quiet company of trees and animals, not in the bustling high-stakes world of billionaires and corporate titans. But the image of his battered face, the memory of his vulnerability, spurred her on. She packed a small bag, her camera gear now feeling like a relic from another life. She took the blood-stained pillowcase, a tangible piece of evidence in a world that had become surreal and uncertain. She locked up her cabin, the place that had been her sanctuary, and drove away, the familiar winding roads of the forest, now leading her not to a place of peace, but towards a confrontation with a man who held the key to a mystery she was determined to unlock. The city was an assault on her senses. The cacophony of traffic, the towering glass and steel structures that blotted out the sky, the relentless crush of people, it was everything she had run away from. But she pushed through, her resolve a shield against the overwhelming stimuli. She found a small, unassuming motel on the outskirts of the city, a place where she could be anonymous, a ghost in the urban jungle. Finding Liam Ashford, she discovered, was like trying to find a specific grain of sand on a vast beach. His corporate headquarters was a fortress, a sleek, impenetrable monolith of modern architecture. She tried calling, but her calls were met with a labyrinth of automated menus and polite but firm receptionists who all gave her the same message: Mr. Ashford was not available. She tried to get past security, but she was met with polite but immovable guards who looked at her simple, practical clothes with a mixture of suspicion and disdain. Days turned into a week. Her savings began to dwindle, and a sense of hopelessness began to seep in. The city was a cold, indifferent beast, and she was a very small, very insignificant creature in its belly. She was about to give up, to retreat back to the familiar comfort of her woods, when fate, or perhaps the algorithm of a city surveillance system, intervened. She was sitting in a small park, trying to gather her thoughts, when a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. The door opened, and a man in a sharp suit stepped out. He was tall and impeccably dressed, but it was his eyes that caught her attention. They were a piercing blue, and they were fixed on her with an unnerving intensity. "Maya Bennett?" he asked, his voice low and even. Maya's heart leaped into her throat. "Who are you?" she asked, her hand instinctively tightening on her bag, the one that held the blood-stained pillowcase. "My name is Julian Croft," he said. "I'm Mr. Ashford's head of security. He'd like to see you." The invitation was both what she had been hoping for and what she had been dreading. This was it, the moment of truth. She stood up, her legs feeling unsteady, and followed the man to the car. The interior was a world of plush leather and polished wood, a stark contrast to her dusty pickup truck. As the car pulled away from the curb, she looked at her reflection in the tinted window. The woman staring back at her looked tired and worn, a far cry from the confident, capable woman she had been in her forest. But there was a spark in her eyes, a flicker of the determination that had brought her this far. She was about to step into the lion's den, and she had no idea if she would come out unscathed. But one thing was certain: she would not leave without answers. The silence that had been imposed upon her was about to be broken. The ride to Liam Ashford's penthouse was a silent, tension-filled journey through the heart of the city. Julian Croft, the stoic head of security, drove with an unnerving focus, his eyes never straying from the road. Maya sat in the back, the plush leather of the seats feeling alien and unwelcoming. She clutched her bag, the pillowcase within it a tangible link to the reality she was determined to reclaim. The penthouse was a palace in the sky, a sprawling expanse of glass and minimalist design that offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the city. It was a space that screamed wealth and power, a world away from the rustic simplicity of her cabin. And there he was, Liam Ashford. He was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his back to her, a silhouette against the glittering cityscape. He turned slowly, and for a moment, Maya's breath caught in her throat. He was just as she remembered him from the news, handsome and impeccably dressed, but now, up close, she could see the faint shadows under his eyes, the subtle tension in his jaw. He looked at her, and his eyes, a deep, intelligent gray, held a flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't recognition, not exactly, but it wasn't the blank look of a stranger either. "Miss Bennett," he said, his voice as smooth and polished as the marble floors beneath her feet. Thank you for coming." The formality of his tone, the way he said her name as if they were meeting for the first time, sent a fresh wave of anger through her. "You know who I am," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "You were in my home. I took care of you." He didn't deny it. He simply nodded, a slow, deliberate gesture. "Yes," he said. "I know." His simple admission, after the public denial, was disarming. "Then why?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Why lie about it? Why pretend it never happened?" He motioned for her to sit, and she reluctantly sank into a sofa that was probably worth more than her entire cabin. He remained standing, a deliberate act of power, of control. "What I'm about to tell you," he began, his voice low and serious, "is not something I share lightly. My life, my company, is in a precarious position right now. What you stumbled into, Miss Bennett, was not a simple car accident." He told her everything. He spoke of the acquisition, the bitter rivalry with Seraphina Dubois, and the whispers of corporate espionage that had been circulating for months. He told her how he had suspected someone was leaking information from within his inner circle, how he had been trying to root out the traitor. "The night of the crash," he said, his gaze distant, "I was on my way to a secret meeting with an informant, someone who claimed to have proof of the espionage. The brakes on my car were tampered with. It was a clear attempt on my life." The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, forming a picture that was far more dangerous than Maya had ever imagined. The fevered whispers of betrayal, the name Seraphina. It was all real. "But why deny it?" she pressed, still struggling to understand. "Why not go to the police?" A humorless smile touched his lips. "In my world, Miss Bennett, the lines between friend and foe are often blurred. I didn't know who I could trust. The police, the media, even my own people, anyone could have been bought. The only way to find the real culprit was to make them think they had succeeded, to make them believe I was either dead or so scared that I would back off." He explained his plan. His disappearance was a calculated move, a way to go underground and investigate without tipping his hand. His reappearance, the denial of the crash, was a carefully crafted piece of theater designed to lull his enemies into a false sense of security. "When I woke up in your cabin," he said, his voice softening slightly, "I was disoriented, confused, but I knew I couldn't stay. I couldn't put you in danger. So I left. Julian found me, and we put our plan properly into motion." Maya listened, a whirlwind of emotions swirling within her. Relief that she wasn't crazy, anger at the deception, and a growing sense of fear for him and now for herself. She had been an unwitting pawn in a very dangerous game. "So, what now?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He looked at her, his gray eyes holding hers. "Now," he said, "I need your help." He explained that the informant he was supposed to meet was now too scared to come forward. But they had left a package for him, a package containing the proof he needed to expose Seraphina and her conspirators. The package was hidden in a place only the informant and Liam knew about, a remote, abandoned weather station in the very same national forest where Maya lived. "I can't go myself," he said. "I'm being watched. Every move I make is scrutinized. But you know those woods better than anyone. You can get to it without being detected." It was a dangerous proposition. She was a photographer, not a spy. But as she looked at him, at the vulnerability that still lingered beneath his polished exterior, she knew she couldn't refuse. She had saved his life once. Now it seemed she had to help him save his legacy. "I'll do it," she said, her voice firm. And in that moment, she knew that her life of quiet solitude was officially over. She was no longer a spectator, a seeker of quiet moments. She was a player in a high-stakes game of corporate espionage, A game where the rules were written by the rich and powerful, and the prize was not just a billion-dollar company, but the truth itself. The forest had brought them together, and now it was calling her back, not as a refuge, but as a battleground. The journey back to the forest was a stark contrast to her departure. Before, she had been a woman seeking answers, fueled by a sense of personal injustice. Now, she was an operative in a clandestine mission, the weight of Liam's trust and the danger of their shared secret a heavy burden. Julian Croft, the stoic head of security, was her unlikely companion. He drove with the same unnerving focus, but now the silence between them was not one of awkwardness, but of shared purpose. He briefed her on the details of the mission, his voice a low, steady murmur that cut through the hum of the engine. He gave her a satellite phone, a small, powerful flashlight, and a detailed map of the area around the abandoned weather station. He also gave her a warning. "Seraphina is not to be underestimated," he said, his eyes meeting hers in the rearview mirror. "She's intelligent, ruthless, and she has a network of people who are loyal to her. They will be looking for anything out of the ordinary. You need to be invisible." The words sent a chill down her spine, but she nodded, her resolve hardening. She had spent years learning the art of being invisible in the forest, of moving without disturbing the natural order of things. Now, she would have to use those skills for a very different purpose. They arrived at the edge of the forest under the cloak of darkness. Julian parked the car in a secluded spot, and they made their way into the woods on foot. The familiar sense of pine and damp earth filled her senses, but now they were laced with an undercurrent of danger. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves, was a potential threat. They hiked for what felt like hours, the beam of her flashlight cutting a narrow path through the inky blackness. Julian moved with a silent, predatory grace that spoke of years of training. Maya, in her element, was equally adept, her boots making barely a sound on the forest floor. They reached the abandoned weather station just before dawn. It was a dilapidated structure, a relic of a bygone era, its paint peeling, its windows shattered. It stood on a small, wind-swept hill, a lonely sentinel against the encroaching wilderness. Julian took up a position in the trees, a silent, watchful guardian. "I'll keep an eye out," he said, his voice a low whisper. "You get the package." Maya took a deep breath and made her way towards the building. The door creaked open with a protesting groan, revealing a dark, musty interior. She stepped inside, the beam of her flashlight dancing across rusted equipment and cobweb-draped furniture. The air was thick with the smell of decay and forgotten memories. The informant's instructions had been specific. The package was hidden in a small, locked maintenance room in the basement. She found the stairs, her footsteps echoing in the silence, and made her way down into the darkness. The basement was even more decrepit than the main floor, a labyrinth of pipes and rusting machinery. She found the maintenance room, its door secured with a heavy padlock. Julian had given her a set of lock picks, another skill she had never imagined she would need. Her hands trembled slightly as she worked the lock, her photographer's dexterity now put to a very different test. After what felt like an eternity, she heard a soft click, and the lock sprang open. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was small and cramped, filled with old tools and discarded equipment. And there it was. A small, nondescript package wrapped in brown paper, tucked away on a dusty shelf. She grabbed it, her heart pounding in her chest. She had it. The proof. As she turned to leave, a floorboard creaked above her. She froze, her blood turning to ice. Julian had said he would keep watch. Had he missed someone? Or had he been taken out? The thought sent a jolt of fear through her. She switched off her flashlight, plunging the basement into darkness. She held her breath, listening, her senses on high alert. She heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving across the floor above her. Then, a voice that was both melodic and menacing, cut through the silence. "I know you're down there, Maya." It was a woman's voice. Seraphina. Maya's mind raced. How had she known? How had she found her? Had Liam's informant been a double agent? Had this all been a trap? Liam really should have known better than to send a civilian to do his dirty work. Seraphina's voice dripped with condescending amusement. He always did have a soft spot for strays. Maya remained silent, her mind frantically searching for a way out. The basement was a maze of pipes and machinery, but there was only one way in and one way out. She was trapped. Come out, wherever you are." Seraphina's voice was now laced with impatience. "Don't make this more difficult than it has to be." Maya knew she couldn't stay hidden forever. She had to do something. She clutched the package to her chest, her knuckles white. This was what it all came down to. This package was the key. She had to protect it. She took a deep breath, her fear giving way to a surge of adrenaline. She was not a stray. She was not a victim. She was a survivor. She had survived a life she didn't want, and she had survived in the wilderness on her own terms. She would survive this. With a defiant cry, she burst out of the maintenance room, her flashlight now a makeshift weapon. She ran towards the stairs, her only hope of escape. She caught a glimpse of Seraphina at the top of the stairs, a tall, elegant woman with cold, calculating eyes. She was not alone. Two large, menacing men stood on either side of her. They were waiting for her. It was a trap, and she had walked right into it. The moment stretched into an eternity. Maya stood at the bottom of the stairs, her heart hammering against her ribs, the package clutched in her hand like a talisman. At the top of the stairs, Seraphina stood like a queen surveying her domain, a cruel, triumphant smile playing on her lips. Her two henchmen, mountains of muscle and menace, took a step forward, their intentions clear. But before they could descend, a new sound cut through the tense silence. The roar of a powerful engine, growing louder and louder, followed by the screech of tires on gravel. A pair of headlights sliced through the pre-dawn gloom, illuminating the clearing in front of the weather station. A sleek black car, the same one that had brought Maya to Liam's penthouse, skidded to a halt. The doors flew open, and Julian Croft, miraculously unharmed, emerged from the passenger side, a handgun held steady in his hand. But it was the driver who made Maya's breath catch in her throat. Liam Ashford. He was dressed in dark, practical clothes, a stark contrast to his usual tailored suits. His face was set in a grim, determined expression, his gray eyes blazing with a cold fire she had never seen before. He moved with a speed and confidence that was both surprising and reassuring. "Seraphina," he said, his voice ringing out with an authority that commanded attention. "It's over." Seraphina's triumphant smile faltered, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated fury. "Liam," she spat, her voice laced with venom. "You should have stayed gone. And let you destroy everything I've built?" he retorted, taking a step closer. "I don't think so." What followed was a chaotic blur of motion. Julian engaged the two henchmen, his movements precise and efficient, a deadly ballet of controlled violence. Liam, his eyes locked on Seraphina, moved towards the weather station. "Maya, get out of there!" he shouted. Spurred into action, Maya scrambled up the stairs, past the new-occupied Seraphina, and out into the cool morning air. She ran towards Liam, the package held out in front of her. "I have it!" she gasped, her voice hoarse. "It's all here." He took it from her, his fingers brushing against hers, sending a jolt of electricity through her. He gave her a look that was a mixture of relief, gratitude, and something else, something deeper, something that made her heart skip a beat. But the moment was shattered by a cry of rage from Seraphina. She had managed to break free from the fray, and she was now running, not towards them, but towards the edge of the clearing, towards the dense, unforgiving wilderness of the forest. "She's getting away!" Maya cried, but Liam was already moving. He handed the package to Julian, who had now subdued the two henchmen, and took off after her. Maya, without a second thought, followed him. The chase was a desperate, frantic scramble through the woods. Seraphina, driven by a primal need to escape, was surprisingly fast and agile. But Liam, fueled by a righteous anger and a desire for justice, was relentless. And Maya, who knew these woods like the back of her hand, was able to anticipate her moves, to cut her off, to herd her towards a place where there was no escape. They finally cornered her on the edge of a steep ravine, the ground crumbling away into a deep rocky chasm. Seraphina stood there, her elegant clothes now torn and dirty, her face a mask of desperation. She was trapped, with Liam and Maya on one side and a sheer drop on the other. "It's over, Seraphina," Liam said, his voice low and steady. "There's nowhere left to run." For a moment, it seemed she might give up. Her shoulders slumped, and a look of defeat flickered in her eyes. But then, with a final, defiant cry, she lunged, not at Liam, but at Maya. It happened so fast, Maya didn't have time to react. Seraphina's hands were on her, pushing her, shoving her towards the edge of the ravine. But Liam was faster. He threw himself between them, his body a shield, absorbing the force of Seraphina's attack. The ground gave way beneath them. For a terrifying moment, they teetered on the brink, a tangle of limbs in desperation. But Liam, with a powerful surge of strength, managed to push Maya back to safety while simultaneously shoving Seraphina away from the edge. Seraphina stumbled backwards, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and fury. She lost her footing on the loose gravel, and, with a final, desperate cry, she tumbled over the edge and disappeared into the chasm below. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of their own ragged breaths. Maya stared at the spot where Seraphina had disappeared, a cold knot of horror in her stomach. Liam stood beside her, his chest heaving, his face pale. He turned to her, his gray eyes searching hers. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice filled with a genuine, heartfelt concern. She could only nod, her voice lost in the whirlwind of emotions that was swirling within her. He had saved her. He had risked his own life to protect her. In that moment, standing on the edge of a ravine, in the heart of the forest that had brought them together, the lines between the billionaire and the photographer, the rescuer and the rescued, blurred and disappeared. They were just two people, bound together by a shared trauma and a connection that was as undeniable as it was unexpected. The aftermath was a blur of police sirens, official statements, and the glaring lights of media attention. The package Maya had retrieved contained irrefutable proof of Seraphina's corporate espionage, as well as evidence of her attempt on Liam's life. The story that unfolded was a sensation, a tale of corporate greed and betrayal that captivated the public. Liam Ashford, the reclusive billionaire, was hailed as a hero, a man who had faced down a dangerous adversary and won. But for Maya, the real story was the one that wasn't being told. The story of the quiet moments in her cabin, the fear and uncertainty of the chase, the bond that had been forged in the heart of the forest. In the weeks that followed, Liam was consumed by the fallout of the scandal. He was in constant meetings, dealing with the press, and trying to steer his company through the turbulent waters of the corporate world. Maya retreated to her cabin, to the familiar comfort of her woods, but it was different now. The silence was no longer a source of solace, but a reminder of the quiet man who had filled it with his presence. She tried to go back to her old life, to her photography, but the world seemed less vibrant, the colors less saturated. She found herself looking at her phone, waiting for a call that never came. A part of her understood. He was a billionaire, a titan of industry. She was a photographer who lived in the woods. Their worlds were too different, their lives too disparate. The adventure was over. It was time to go back to reality. Then, one sunny afternoon, as she was tending to her garden, she heard the sound of a car approaching. It was a familiar black car, and as it pulled up to her cabin, her heart began to beat a little faster. Liam stepped out, not in a suit, but in a simple pair of jeans and a casual shirt. He looked tired, but there was a smile on his face, a genuine, unguarded smile that reached his eyes. He walked towards her, his gaze never leaving hers. "I was hoping I might find you here," he said, his voice soft. "I live here," she replied, a small smile playing on her lips. "I know," he said. "And I was hoping you might let me stay for a while." He told her that he had stepped back from the day-to-day operations of his company, that he had realized there was more to life than boardrooms and stock prices. He told her that the quiet moments in her cabin had been the first time in years he had felt truly at peace. He told her that he had been so consumed by the aftermath of the scandal that he hadn't known what to say, how to bridge the gap between their two worlds. "But I know one thing," he said, his voice filled with a raw, honest emotion. "I don't want to go back to the way things were before. I want to build something new. And I want to build it with you." He took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "You saved my life, Maya," he said, his gray eyes looking deep into hers. "But you did more than that. You showed me what it means to truly live." And as she looked at him, at the man who had crashed into her life and turned it upside down, she knew that her adventure was far from over. It was just beginning. The forest had brought them together, a broken billionaire and a solitary photographer. And now, under the watchful eyes of the ancient trees, they were about to write a new story, a story of two different worlds colliding, of two hearts finding a home in the most unexpected of places. It was a story that was far more valuable than any billion-dollar company, a story that was, in a word, priceless.